Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. We are so excited about today's guest, mostly because it's Scott Dieter. He is the Director of Early Childhood Education in Lorain, Ohio. They are implementing Wit Wisdom, and we are so pumped to hear specifically about his implementation plan and the way that they've rolled out their implementation to get teacher buy-in and to change mindsets over this past couple of months, because they are a new implementation to Wit and Wisdom. So we're really excited because it's new, and he'll be able to share some experiences that we can all learn from. So Scott, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk Wit and Wisdom with you all.
Yeah, Melissa, I know that I shared a little bit about Scott, that he, with you before we started, that he began in April of 2018 and that he's from Lorain, Ohio. But Scott, why don't you share with all of us and all of the listeners a little bit about yourself? Just tell us about yourself and Lorain, Ohio, where you support.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a Northeast Ohio native. And so I didn't grow up in Lorain, but Lorain is pretty close to Cleveland, where I live with my family. I've been in Northeast Ohio for the past 6 years. I'm losing track of time at this point, but after getting my start in education in Nashville, Tennessee. So I taught kindergarten in Nashville. I was a Teach for America Corps member. And then after my Corps experience, moved back to Ohio with my wife and did some work on staff with the Teach for America region here, supporting Corps members with a specialization in early childhood education, given that kindergarten was my background. Then I did some work supporting school leaders and sort of developing a leadership pipeline here in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. And as I was doing that work, the Lorain City School District was sort of a hot topic because it was just the second district that was subject to House Bill 70, which we can get into a little bit, but it was the legislation that basically led to the state takeover of districts that met a certain number of criteria. And so as this was going on, we knew there were going to be a lot of talent needs in Lorain. And so essentially I was trying to recruit people to join the Lorain City School District team when I was working for Teach for America, because I thought, this is just a place that's going to need some leaders. And essentially I recruited myself, because as I was
Good work.
Yeah. As I was explaining the vision of Mr. Hardy, our CEO, to folks and trying to get them interested in Lorain, I was like, this sounds amazing. And so when this role opened up, I was like, this is like really where I feel like I want my next step to be. And so that's how I ended up as the Director of Early Childhood Education. And the role is really, it's really trying to establish a continuum of learning from pre-K through second grade that sets up our scholars to really just be prepared to be reading on grade level by the time they reach third grade, so that after they leave the early childhood realm and they go into third grade, that they really have that strong foundation, so we don't have to do as much remediation, we don't have to do as much catch up, and that they're really prepared for success later on. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Scott, can you tell us a little bit about when you first got to Lorain, what the literacy landscape looked like when you got there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the district had been using Wonders as the primary literacy curriculum in K-5, and supplementing it with Foundations in K2 as the phonics component. And so that's what existed. And when we came in, my big focus in 2018, 2019, so last school year was preschool. So really starting from the ground up and making sure that we had a strong foundation there. And so last year we sort of left the K5 ELA curriculum alone. We gave teachers some guidance on how to make the most of Wonders, and we did some coaching and training around Foundations, but that's really it. And we realized pretty quickly, doing some like district level walkthroughs where we were just getting into as many classrooms as possible, that that the texts that were being put in front of students just were not rigorous enough. They were not at grade level. They were not the appropriate level of complexity. And teachers were putting text in front of their students for most of the lesson. And so we had like this strength that our teachers had, but we just hadn't been giving them the right materials. And so that's when we started to realize, like, all right, the first thing we have to do is just put better resources in front of our kids. And we decided to start with K2, so that we could start smaller, start to build a foundation, not bite off too much too quickly, but then give us a foundation that we could build upon in the future. And so that's kind of how we went from where we were when I came in to where we are now.
Scott, would you tell us about when you were going into those classrooms and you were seeing your teachers use Wonders, what exactly, like if you could provide a couple pieces of evidence just that you remember seeing firsthand and experiencing, like what made you think this is not enough?
So I mean, the big thing was just that it was just a lot of basals, right? So it was just texts that were not authentic, that were sort of a part of these basals that, you would look around and kids all had the text in front of them. But, when you were reading the second grade text, it just wasn't mirroring what we knew that the standards actually expected of students. And, I right around the time that I was doing these walkthroughs, because this was in January of this year, of 2019, we had been working on this district writing assessment as well. And so I'd been doing a lot of work with looking at what text complexity looks like according to the core standards for each grade level, and just like noticing the mismatch. And so and just like thinking of a specific classroom that I was in, and the text, it was a nonfiction text, and so there was some knowledge building going on, but just in terms of like vocabulary, sentence structure, it was just like very, very basic, and was not lining up with all of these sort of examples of what text complexity should look like in second grade. And so I think that was really an eye-opening moment for me.
I actually, while you're talking, I pulled up on Ed Reports, I pulled up Wonders, and
me
not
too,
the first.
Lori. I'm right there with you.
So I have to say, this is not the first time I've done this, because I am a parent in a school district that uses Wonders. And it makes me so upset to see the sheets come home that are all strategy driven. And my kid comes home in tears, like, I didn't get the right place where the title and the heading and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, It's okay. It's not a big deal. You understand what you read. Right. Because, you're taking it out of context of the text. So I'm looking at Wonders right now. And Melissa is too. And so for K1 and 2, for text quality, they received about a 55 out of 58, which is a green. But then for building knowledge, it's 24 out of 32, and in one grade level, 26 out of 32. So they're in the yellow range. And so the alignment rating is partially meets expectations. And like, kudos to you, Scott, because I feel like accepting nothing less than fully meets expectations and knowing that your students deserve that is like the best first step that any leader could take. So like, good for you for knowing that and for putting your stake in the ground and being like, this is not good enough for my kids because they deserve better. And there is better.
Yeah, exactly.
Melissa, any thoughts as you're looking at it?
Nope, same thoughts. I'm already on my next question though, of thinking like, how did you guys get to, because many people don't know about EdReport or the curriculum that is available. Some people don't even know about Wonders, right? So I'm just wondering how you guys then went about like looking for new curriculum and what that looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first decision that was made was we need better resources and we need them yesterday, right? And so once we decided that was going to be a focus for this school year, so again, this was back in January, we leveraged a few resources. So we were partnering with TNTP at the time. They actually helped us with those walkthroughs. They sort of took the lead on those so that we had that third party, neutral third party perspective, which was really helpful. And so they had that context. So when we came to them and said, hey, what recommendations do you have about really high quality ELA curriculum? They were able to provide a list for us based on their work with some other districts. And so there were some common examples that were coming up. And the other thing that they shared was the report out of Tennessee, their LIFT initiative. So I read that report, and that was just super helpful because it was like, look, like all, this big sort of partnership of districts have already started from essentially the same place that we're starting and are a few years ahead of us. So let's learn from what they did and not reinvent the wheel. And saw that a lot of them used EL education and some of them used Wit and Wisdom. And so, and then looking at EdReports as well as the Louisiana Department of Education, their ratings of curricula, and just seeing like what are the standouts, and just noticing that like the two that kept popping up were the EL education resource and Wit and Wisdom. And we decided, given that we had, I think we knew from the outset that like, look, these are not the ideal conditions for curriculum rollout, right? Like we were operating under a much tighter timeline than anyone would have wanted. But the level of urgency was what it was. And so we had to make it work. So given the time that we had, we decided like we didn't want our pilot and our use of our teachers' valuable time to be about looking through 6 different options that at the end of the day are all rated pretty much the same, that are going to essentially get you the same level of quality. What we wanted to do is like, all right, let's narrow it down already to 2 based on all these recommendations, but then let's make sure that we get our teachers' input on which of these works best in our context with our kids and is like the most usable. So what are like the learning design and everything down to like the way that the teacher's edition and the student's edition is laid out, and the way that the texts are packaged, like all of these things, like which resource gets like is set up to for you to most efficiently deliver the instruction that we know that our kids need. And so that is what we chose to do with our pilot. But to actually, again, to get those two options, we really just looked around and noticed that from all of these places that we were looking for recommendations, like we were seeing, these two resources come up again and again.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, we here in Baltimore, we did go through all and did that long, lengthy process you mentioned, and we ended up with the same two at our top two.
It's true.
And that's the thing.
Good
is like, I feel like Ed Reports in Louisiana Believes, God bless them for doing this very important work. And it's like, I'm not going to assume that I know more than they do. And so,
right.
So yeah, I think that felt like the right call in the moment. It was still a very short pilot, and that was one of the challenges that we ran into that I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about. But it felt like we used that time as well as we could, given the circumstances.
Yeah, it sounds like it. We've said before to other folks as well that in Baltimore, we did this process and did come out to the exact same thing. So you saved yourself some time and energy, possibly working smarter, not harder, using those great resources. I know you said that there were not optimal conditions, and you mentioned time as being one of them. But I'm wondering if there were any other factors, like was there a political climate or anything, kind of making you feel this urgency a little bit more? If so, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I won't sugarcoat it. There's the climate, and I think part of this is just common sense, that like the climate that exists in a state takeover situation where the administration is essentially placed there through state legislation, coming because the state has declared that that the district so far has been failing, and saying we're going to come in and solve your problem. I mean, like you're starting from an adversarial position, right? And so, I mean, that just is what it is. And I think our administration was very cognizant of that and did a lot of things to try and bridge that gap. And some of them worked, and a lot of them didn't work as well. But ultimately, like I think the political condition that existed was a lack of trust. One, like a lack of trust in like motivation, right? So like why, like, so I think with every decision, people both like within the district and in the community would question, and I think rightly, like I think it's good for them to be skeptical and critical. What is the motivation behind this decision? Why are we changing the curriculum? Is it because of some connection that someone has to this publisher and that sort of thing? So which all, and I have empathy for folks, because like I understand where that lack of trust could come from, again, just given the circumstances, right? I mean, how that would feel like being in this community for 30 years and then having this, what you perceive as like an outsider coming in. So like, I get that. So that was one thing. And then I think the other thing is like, Lorain has been through a lot of change and turmoil, both like within the school district, but also just like as a community over the past few decades. And so with that comes, change fatigue. And I think like almost like this jaded sort of sense of like, well, how long is this going to last?
Yeah.
We are the latest in a long line of people who have come in and tried to turn things around.
Yeah.
And it's different in some significant ways, because it's not local control, right? Like the CEO is appointed by the state, but it is, you know, I think in some ways it just feels like, oh, this is just another one. And so all that being said, like, yeah, I think that it was a climate that, again, like I understand why it was the way that it was, but it definitely made us think very carefully about, you know, how can we structure our implementation plan in such a way that we are really like prioritizing building trust and building confidence in the rationale for why we selected this program, and just, you know, this Wit and Wisdom as a resource. And so that's a lot of the kind of thinking that we were doing as we were developing this, as we were piloting and developing this implementation plan.
Yeah. So when you talk about building trust and confidence, I love that, by the way. And you're thinking about this implementation plan and how you prioritize those two things. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looked like in action in the plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a big part of it was lessons learned through the pilot. Mm-hmm. So we had a group of, we started with 10, but you know, just because of some challenges and conflicts, I think we ended up with 7 or 8 in our final group. Teachers, K2 teachers, half of them did Wit and Wisdom, did a module from Wit and Wisdom. Half of them did a module from EL Education.
Okay.
This was in like April of last year. Mm-hmm. And I say did a module, but we didn't get through a whole module. Like we got through like a month of instruction. Mm-hmm. And so like there were a lot of logistical challenges in terms of like orders taking much longer than we anticipated. I think was like the most significant challenge. And then like what that meant for how much time folks had to prepare, mm-hmm. and like whether they had, you know, they had some pieces, but not all of them. So they were trying to teach lessons without actually having all the copies of the core texts. And so like the pilot itself was, I think, a very frustrating experience for not only the teachers involved, but for myself, but I think in a productive way, mm-hmm. because what that allowed us to do when we went to develop the implementation plan for the district-wide rollout was be like, here are all of the places that went wrong. Mm-hmm. And here are the things that we know we need to get right. So that we don't have a district full of teachers who are feeling that same level of frustration that our pilot teachers rightly felt. And so that was one thing, was just like using the pilot as really, you know, a vehicle for just sort of ironing out some of those wrinkles and figuring out what the wrinkles were that needed to be ironed out. And the second piece of that was just straight up asking that pilot group, like, okay, given your experience, like we broke it into 4 categories. Like, what is the professional development that you think teachers need and when to implement this successfully? What are the resources, like the physical resources that you think that teachers need and when to implement this successfully? What are the structures that you think need to change? And by structures, I mean like daily schedule, like how, you know, the number of minutes that you have to where you're expected to teach ELA, like what needs to be true about that, what needs to be true about the report card. And so just got I said 4, I think it was actually just those 3 categories, but we got their input on those things. And the 4th was like we separated out PD and coaching. Mm-hmm. And so we got their input on those things in the middle of the pilot and then at the end of the pilot. And by using both like their voice and, you know, what we had gathered on our end of like, oh, like, you know, this is what went wrong in terms of getting the materials. We went into the implementation plan with a very clear picture of here are the things that we have to get right. Mm-hmm. So that was the I think like the preparation that allowed us to sort of build trust and confidence into the plan. Is honestly like we knew where we had sort of missed the mark on those things in the pilot, and we were able to correct for that.
Yeah.
And I think the second thing is just like trying to weave the rationale and sort of our approach to implementation into every part of the implementation plan. And so like my main message that I wanted folks to internalize throughout this implementation process is this is a 3-year implementation process, right? Like when we purchased this curriculum, like that's the message that we kept getting from great minds. Like, don't expect perfection after year 1. Like this is gonna take time for everyone. It's gonna be hard. It's gonna be frustrating. The same productive struggle that we expect from our kids, like we're gonna be feeling that too.
Yes.
And so like patience is something that we tried to stress in the implementation plan, and just like in a willingness to try, right? Like an open-mindedness, and like what we expect this year is that like you implement these lessons like as they are written to make sure that we're hitting the standards, and to make sure that the thing that we're like testing out is actually, you know, the thing that we are intending to test out, that we're not making these radical changes to it and then saying that it doesn't work. Yep. So like, so those were the pieces that we tried to build in. So like, even when you look at like our implementation goals, like our goals are, we have 3 of them. One is all about like the extent of wit and wisdom lessons that we observe that are, or the percentage of those lessons that are spent mostly reading, discussing, or writing about complex texts. Mm-hmm. So like, do students spend almost the entire lesson like really engaging with the text, whether they're reading it or talking about it or writing about it? Which again, like was something that our teachers were already pretty strong at. So this is like, all right, just sort of keep doing what you're doing here. Just keep the text at the center of the lesson.
Yeah.
Implementing with integrity is the term that Wit and Wisdom uses in their implementation guide. And so I like that because it sort of captured like, yes, fidelity and you know your students. And so, you know, there are some adaptations that any teacher is going to need to make to any curriculum out of the box. And then finally, measuring teachers' confidence in their students' ability to read, discuss, and write about grade level texts. Like, do we see that increasing over the course of the year? And so what we tried to communicate with these goals is like, we're not setting goals about what your state test scores are going to be at the end of the year. And it's K2, so they don't take state test scores, but even like NWEA, like we're not setting goals around that yet, right? Like our goal is, our kids, like, are you providing opportunities for kids to look at the text? Are you implementing the lessons with fidelity and integrity? And like, and on our end, like, are we seeing through your experiences that you are building confidence in what your students are able to do? And if we can see those 3 things by the end of this year, then that to me is 100% a win. And so just trying to be like as consistent as possible with folks that like, that's what we're looking for. We don't care about pacing. I don't care if it takes you 3 days to get through a lesson, that's fine. And when I give you feedback, I'm not going to give you feedback about pacing. I'm going to give you feedback about these things. And so yeah, that is I think fundamentally how we try to approach that building trust and confidence.
Yeah, I noticed, Scott, that when you were speaking, 2 of the goals were more quantitative because they were measured. I know you have measurement. I'm looking at your implementation plan. So there's measurement tools and there's frequencies. And then the third goal is more of a qualitative goal. And I think that I'm making an inference, but that is really where that teacher buy-in is critical. And so then you're giving teachers an opportunity to have some qualitative input into this. So it doesn't feel so much like quantitative data driven. It gives them an opportunity to stop and reflect, like, since I've been implementing Wit and Wisdom, what am I noticing? And are these things in my students' abilities improving? Are they, able to read more complex texts and discuss and write about them? And I think that gives them that pause point to just stop and think about what their students can do in a really impactful way that then provides you with some feedback. So I like that, doing that in the form of a survey. I think that's interesting. And I think that's a tangible tip that if folks are listening that and they're implementing a high quality curriculum, that could be one way to garner teacher input and, in the also parallel by buy-in or create buy-in for teachers. So I think that's a pretty cool point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think what I took away from that, Scott, too, is like just that switch to a learner mindset from accountability is huge. And it sounds like you guys are, I don't want to say accountability, but like you are still expecting teachers to implement this curriculum well, but with the idea that we have to do that in order to see if it's working, right? We can't just not even try it and then make decisions based on that, but we need to try it with integrity to see if it's working so we can learn from it. And I just think, I'm wondering if there's anything that came up. You talked about how you went about doing it already, but especially with the pilot, and thank goodness for those teachers that were willing to do that. But I'm just wondering if that's something that you guys think about really is like changing that mindset. And I'm thinking even of not just teachers, but principals, school leaders, district leaders, if there's anything else that you guys have like come across with the mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think like the big I think like the primary way that we've tried to address that specific mindset shift from like sort of like a checklist, like, am I checking these boxes when someone comes into my room, to like a learning sort of experimental mindset, right? Is and like in a growth mindset is just like how we orient when like there is a lesson that I observe or that school leaders observe that isn't done with fidelity. And like what do you do in that moment? And so like that's something that I get that I've gotten a lot of questions from both teachers and school leaders about. And like a specific example would be like we see some teachers supplementing Wit and Wisdom with resources that other teachers have created that are like intended to be aligned to Wit and Wisdom. So it's the same stuff, but that they're packaging differently and then putting on teachers, paid teachers or whatever. And so we see people using those. And a lot of times the question is, are they allowed to do that? And like, I don't orient toward any decision a teacher makes within reason in that way of like, are they allowed to do that or not? For me, the question is, and this is what I sort of coach school leaders on, is like, I would ask them, I would say like, this is essentially a different version of a document that you have in the student edition. So tell me, what do you think you get from this that you don't get from that? And have the teacher explain it and defend it. And like, if their rationale makes sense, and if they can show that like, yeah, this is working for kids because I actually think that this is laid out better and it's not losing anything, then that shouldn't be the thing that you focus on when you give them feedback. But if you notice that like it's that something's being watered down, or that like some key understanding is being missed because of the adjustment to the resource, then that leads to a conversation that's not, oh, you didn't check this, but it's like a conversation about, let's actually look at what's different between this and this. And, how about you just try doing it this way next time, and let's compare how your students respond to that, and then talk about that at our follow-up conversation. So really taking a more coaching centered approach. And that takes time, and it's hard for I think it's like, it's hard to adjust to being on the receiving end of that. It's hard to adjust to being on the giving end of that. But I think that orientation is really how we've tried to shift that mindset.
That makes so much sense. I can actually give a quick example that, what I've seen.
Yeah.
There was one teacher who she made her own worksheet, but it was because she just wanted more room for them to write. Like there wasn't enough space. I was like, well, that seems completely reasonable, right? That you want them to write more and have more space to write, and didn't change anything about the actual lesson. But I did see another one where they, instead of using some examples that were already given to them in Wit and Wisdom, the students had to then come up with their own, I think it was main ideas or topics, something that summarized it for them, and they had to do it on their own, and the students struggled. And I was like, you kind of that was a scaffold built in that you took away from them, and that was a place where I would have really wanted to know the why. So I
Sure.
like that idea of like asking why.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that also gives the teachers a moment to reflect, because I've seen the same. I've seen worksheets on Teachers Pay Teachers that are the exact same as the student workbook, which I don't think is technically they're allowed to do.
Is that legal?
I think it's illegal. So I want to name that. but and in my head I'm always like, why would you buy something that's already available just because it has like a cute border? Like, like do you really need that? But then I've also seen where I've looked at what's happening in a student workbook and then some things on Teachers Pay Teachers, and the same quote activity or whatever it might be, when you look at the Teachers Pay Teachers one and you're trying to align it with what they're doing, is like you said, that watered down piece. And it's just confusing why, that would be the choice over what was already there. But it's confusing to me because I'm looking at it without hearing the why behind it. And I think that gives that pause point for teachers to pause and be like, you know what? Am I watering this down for students? Maybe that's their aha moment. And, I think that, that Kier said that in our podcast with him. He was like, what do I expect of my students? Am I the one who's holding them up?
Right.
And so I think that that's a good reflection point, because sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So the intention could be an unintended consequence that happens there. But I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, just to speak a little bit more on that, is like, I think that when you take that approach, the message that you're sending to the teacher when you ask why you made this decision is, I trust that you are an informed and competent educator who makes decisions about instruction for a reason. And we might disagree on the reason, but I owe it to you to figure out what that reason was before I jump to a conclusion about it. Yeah. And like, I think that also, that's just not the message that you get when it's a checklist and you say you met 3 out of 5 of these things. To change them. And I think that I also see that with when you think about, and we haven't really touched on this at all yet, but I know that you have a lot on your podcast previously, is just like, the reading science that the science of reading stuff that Wit and Wisdom is really based on, and the ideas that sort of inform the learning design of Wit and Wisdom, being such a shift from the approach that teachers are so used to around, why is it all complex text as opposed to, leveled readers, and we're concerned that it's, reading to learn instead of learning to read, and all these things. Like, I think like there has to be some empathy and willingness to take the teacher's perspective on this. Is if you've been teaching 25 years with a certain foundation, and then that's the way that you were trained, then of course, like you should, as an expert in your field, be skeptical if someone comes in and tells you otherwise and says, do it because I say to do it. And so I think there has to be a dialogue there that is partly about exposing folks to new research and science that maybe like just wasn't available when they were getting trained or earlier on, but also, helping them to see the benefits of this approach at the classroom level, and like, what you see your kids actually capable of doing that maybe they just never even had the chance to with the old approach. And I know that can be a big mindset shifter. So I just like, that's really important to me in the implementation plan too, is for teachers to feel like they have agency and that their ideas are in dialogue with Wit and Wisdom if they are, if there's some conflict there, and not that it's just like, no, stop doing that, start doing this.
Yeah. And I know when we talked before this podcast, that you were really invested in prioritizing teacher feedback, and having that teacher voice, that agency. When you did that, you had shared that teachers really wanted PD facilitated by curriculum experts and were invested in not using the train the trainer model.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about why they shared that and why they particularly asked for that? Because I think that that's a very intuitive ask of teachers.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like ultimately where they were coming from was like if there is this sense of urgency and we're implementing this thing that's new to us, like what if we have a question about it, we want the person that we ask the question to be able to answer it, as opposed to saying, let me ask somebody else.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. Is just like it's just more efficient to have someone who is leading the training to already have that level of experience. I think that there's a time and place for a facilitator to be like a co-learner, but there are other times where like that just is not what is needed, and I think that this is one of those times. And I think the second part is like wanting someone who has seen the finish line, right? Who has like gotten through implementing, who actually has that experience with the curriculum. So like, the things that are troubling or concerning when you have only been implementing a curriculum for like a month and you don't yet see how all the pieces fit together, for someone to say, yep, I felt that way in September of the year that I implemented it. I know exactly where you're coming from. And here are the things that happened after that, that can reassure you. And here are some things that I would suggest that you do. And so I just think that perspective of having been through it was really important to folks. And so we wanted to make sure that we honored that.
That's great. I'm like, when you said that, I'm still thinking that that's just so intuitive, and that they like, just the fact that they asked for that is just so important, and that they recognize that this is bigger than them. Like, I feel like that meant that you did a really good job with investing them in the research and understanding the why in order for them to have that specific ask. So kudos to the teachers in Lorain, Ohio, who piloted and who contributed to the implementation plan and who asked for such incredible things to be a part of this plan so that they could execute their curriculum well.
Absolutely. I mean, really, like without that, like I can, like that conversation that we had about what they needed for implementation to work, like was probably the most valuable 45 minutes of that whole process, because like I agree, they were very intuitive and in tune with what the rest of the district would need, and it really helped. So it was a really great bunch of folks.
That's awesome.
Scott, did the teachers also suggest the monthly teacher PLCs?
So not directly. I think that like part of what they requested was like, we want time to collaborate within our grade level, but across the district, so that we can like, share best practices. And so as a way of balancing those two asks, we decided, like, let's front load the training from the experts. So we did lead Wit and Wisdom for our school leaders. We did launch Wit and Wisdom, the training for our new teachers, or for all of our teachers, I should say. And then we did the module and lesson study protocol session where they like walk the teachers through that protocol. And so we've gone through all three of those now. And so they've got that foundation. And now in November, we're launching those PLCs, or now we're calling them working groups. And they're split by grade level. So they are, K teachers are all together, first grade teachers are all together, second grade. And they have some school leaders who are facilitating those, but they're implementing the planning and preparation practices that they learned from the experts. And so at our next one, they're going to be planning module 2, using the module protocol, because they're going to be starting module 2 in late November, according to our pacing guide. And so yeah, that was how we tried to meet that. And we have some flexibility. Like if we decide to use one of our monthly teacher PD days for like a training from the Wit and Wisdom, to have great minds come back out and maybe like do the writing Wit and Wisdom or one of the other trainings, then we can do that. And so we have some of that flexibility built in, but this is sort of how we tried to honor both of those requests.
I think that's great. You're getting the dual, you have supports in place within your district, but then you're also pulling in the experts when needed. So I think that's a really nice balance and a great cadence for folks to hear who are listening and who are wondering, how am I going to do this work in my district? It's a good support plan that you have in place.
Yeah, and we'll see how the working groups go, right? Because I think the expert-led trainings have gone really well. I mean, Great Minds does a great job. Like all their facilitators actually have experience doing the implementing the curriculum themselves, which is so helpful. It's not just like a sales rep who's doing it, right?
Right.
Which you see sometimes, and so they really knock their PD out of the park, I think. But we'll see how the working groups go, and we'll adjust. But right now, I'm feeling pretty good about that aspect of the plan.
Good. Well, we are hoping that maybe we can have you back on in the spring, and then hear an update after you've implemented for a year.
Yeah, I would love to.
Absolutely.
And I can listen back to this and be like, naive, October Scott.
No, I think you're very strategic, October Scott. I think
I appreciate that.
Give yourself some credit. Well, we can't thank you enough for being here today. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share with anyone listening who is going into this? Maybe they've just uncovered that they're using a Wonders type of curriculum and they're like, we need more, we need better.
Our last piece of advice, we've been forgetting to ask people this, Lori.
I know we do keep forgetting. Well, so Scott, any advice?
We're bringing it back.
Yeah, I two things. I think first, and this is just reiterating a point that we all made earlier, but if you are doing, well, I lied. I'm going to do three things. How about that? First, if you are doing a pilot and you don't have a ton of time, I started to second guess the decision because of some feedback from folks to focus more on usability than on actually selecting from a larger group and just having the purpose of that group be, essentially redoing what Ed Reports did. So I was second guessing not doing that. And I'm so glad that we did it the way that we did. Because like you said, I think we would have ended up in the same place that Ed Reports did. So I think for folks who are piloting, I think that's going to run counter to what a lot of people would suggest. But I think, I think it's perfectly reasonable to outsource that piece. We'll see if I still say that in the spring.
Well, there are so many places where essentially if you had done that work, which would be a ton of work, that's I think liken it to teachers writing their own lessons and curriculum. Like
Yeah.
there are so many places where that information is readily available, as you named.
For free.
For free. I mean, literally at a click. Like while you were talking about it, Melissa and I both pulled it up in less than 5 seconds. Like, you know, and then we could have also pulled it up on Louisiana Beliefs in less than 5 seconds. Like the work is done, and you can read all the reports. So you're doing the better work where you're internalizing. I always think working smarter, not harder, instead of gathering, you know?
Yeah.
That's a great tip.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice.
So that's thing one. I think thing two is just like, and this is really hard for me, but like, don't let the lack of a perfect set of conditions keep you from doing it. Like we knew from the outset that the pilot was going to be fast and messy. And we did it anyway because we had to. And I'm very glad that we did, instead of waiting. Because there were some folks, you know, who were suggesting like, well, maybe we extend the pilot and we don't roll out. And I think the more time you can spend on a pilot, the better. But like, don't let, you know, to be kind of trite, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So that's two. And then let's see if I can remember my third one. Why did I say I lied and changed it to 3? I should have just stuck with the 2.
Stick with those 2.
Your 2 were great.
Yeah. But that's what I would say to folks. And I think what has helped us so far.
Yeah. Well, there's no perfect conditions ever anywhere
Yep.
in life.
Yep.
I mean, we could go down a whole trail of that. Like wait till everything's perfect too, fill in the blank, and you never start. So
Right. Yep.
That's great. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, it was
Scott.
so great to talk to you.
Thank you both so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll connect again in the spring, and then we can give all of our listeners an update on Lorain, Ohio, and high quality curriculum, wit and wisdom implementation. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.